So, how does a country solve a debt crisis that looks, well, impossible? We're talking about no new taxes, no massive spending cuts, and definitely no crashing the global economy. It honestly sounds like a fantasy, right? But the US government has a plan, and it's a playbook that's been used before, taken straight from the history books. To really get a handle on just how big this problem is, you just have to look at this one number: 120%. The US national debt is now over 120% of its entire GDP. Think about that. The country owes more than its entire economy produces in a full year. The only other time we've seen a number this high was right after World War II. And that's really the perfect word for it: a trap. A giant mountain of debt with no obvious way out. So the big question we're going to unpack here is, how does the government plan to get out of this? To really feel the urgency here, the pressure the government is under, you have to look at what it costs just to carry this debt. And wow, it is a staggering figure. It's putting an insane amount of pressure on the Federal Reserve. $1 trillion a year. And that's not even paying down the actual debt. That's just the interest, the fee to keep the lights on, so to speak. It's like being on a financial treadmill you can't get off. And that $1 trillion number, it's going up. So you can see why the Fed and the Treasury need to find a solution, and they need to find one fast. Now, when you're this deep in debt, there are really only a handful of ways out. But as we're about to see, all the usual solutions, they're basically dead ends for all sorts of political and economic reasons. In theory, you've got four paths. You can run a surplus, basically tighten your belt. You can just default, refuse to pay. You can cross your fingers and hope the economy grows like crazy. Or there's that fourth option. It's not pretty, but boy, is it effective. Okay, first up, running a surplus. This means huge spending cuts or major tax hikes. I mean, in today's political world, come on, it's not going to happen. It's pretty much a political impossibility. All right, what about option two? Just default, rip up the bill. Well, the debt would disappear, sure, but so would the entire global financial system. The whole thing is built on the idea that US government bonds are safe. It would be absolutely catastrophic. So that's off the table. Option three is kind of the dream scenario, right? We have some massive economic boom, maybe AI changes everything, and the economy grows so fast the debt just kind of shrinks in comparison. It's possible, but you can't build your entire national financial strategy on hope. It's just way too uncertain. And that leaves us with the fourth and final door. It's not impossible, not catastrophic. It's just really unpleasant for most people. And this, right here, is the core of the government's playbook. Just inflate the debt away. So what does that actually mean, to inflate it away? Well, it's a process where the government intentionally makes the dollar worth less. The debt is priced in dollars, right? So if you make each dollar less valuable, that massive pile of debt becomes a whole lot less of a burden to pay back. The best way to understand this is to think about a mortgage. Let's say you have a $500,000 mortgage on a $500,000 house. Now, let's say inflation runs at 4%, and your home's value goes up to $520,000. Your mortgage is still $500,000, but it's now a smaller piece of the pie. The debt itself didn't shrink, but its burden on you sure feels a lot smaller. The government is basically doing the exact same thing, just on a ridiculously massive scale. Its debt is the mortgage, and its house is the entire US economy, the GDP. So as inflation pushes up the dollar value of the economy, that debt-to-GDP ratio gets smaller and smaller, even if not a single dollar of the actual debt gets paid off. Now, this might sound like some kind of wild, radical new theory, but it's not at all. In fact, this isn't the first time the US has faced this exact problem and used this exact solution. We just have to rewind the clock to the end of World War II. From 1942 to 1951, the situation was almost identical. Debt was at 120% of GDP. So what did they do? The Fed and the Treasury teamed up. The Fed basically agreed to keep interest rates artificially low, which let the government borrow money super cheap while inflation ran hot. This slowly but surely eroded the real value of that massive war debt. But here's the crazy twist. The original 1951 agreement, called the Treasury-Fed Accord, was about the Fed breaking free from the Treasury's control so it could go fight inflation. Today, what some people are calling for is a new accord, which is the literal opposite. It's an alliance for closer coordination, all to manage the debt. So how would this new plan work? Well, step one, the Fed cuts interest rates to get inflation going. But here's the really clever part. You deregulate banks by lifting something called the supplementary leverage ratio, or SLR. It's a rule that limits how much they can lend. Getting rid of it frees up banks to buy a ton of government bonds. That creates a whole new source of demand, which helps keep the government's borrowing costs low, even if inflation starts to take off. So yeah, the government has a pretty smart plan to handle its debt. But this isn't just some abstract economic policy happening in a vacuum. It has very real, direct consequences for your wallet, for your savings, for all of us. There's actually an official term for this strategy. Economists call it financial repression. It sounds kind of intense because, well, it is. It's a quiet way for the government to get its books in order without having to make those politically toxic choices like raising taxes or cutting spending. And you really have to see the two sides of this coin. On one side, for the government, it works. The real burden of its debt shrinks. Mission accomplished. But on the other side, your side, it means the purchasing power of every single dollar you've saved goes down. It's basically a hidden tax that you pay through higher prices on everything. And we know exactly how this story plays out because we've seen it before. Back in that post-World War II period, people who held their wealth in cash or in government bonds, they got crushed. Their savings were eaten away by inflation. Meanwhile, people who owned real assets, things like real estate, commodities, stocks, they did great. Their wealth actually rose with inflation. So when you boil it all down, it's pretty simple. The government has a playbook to solve its debt problem. It's a strategy that has worked before, and it's a solution where they come out ahead. The real question is, what's your plan going to be while this all plays out?